I pulled the ladder off the truck and leaned it against the porch. I grabbed the scraper, the wood block, and a single sheet of sandpaper all in my right hand so I could climb up to the roof with my left. Carol grabbed her brush and opened a can of the periwinkle blue paint and took them down the alley. When I was safely up, she took the ladder down the alley with her. It was a 10-foot straight wooden ladder, just right, I imagine, for the side of the house and the alleyway. Just tall enough to reach under the gutters, but not so tall that you couldn't reach through it to the trim and clapboards around the windows. The house, like most in the neighborhood, was 2 to 3 feet off the ground, up on blocks. As a result, from the ground, the bottoms of the alleyway windows were right around head high. To reach the middle of the windows, you needed a step ladder. To reach the tops of the windows and the 2 feet above them, you needed at least a 10-footer. Before starting, I walked to the edge of the roof and peeked around the corner of the house to watch Carol set up. She placed the top of the ladder up against the house above the bedroom window and braced the bottom of the ladder against a chain-link fence. With the paint can and brush hooked temporarily to a middle rung, she stepped up to the second rung from the side to avoid catching her foot against the fence. She swung her right leg up and around to face the ladder square with her left leg. The leg movement was graceful, but for the most part it was her left arm that had done the heavy lifting. Her right arm leaned on the top of the fence for a second, but quickly released it to allow full movement. Moments later she was 5 rungs up and dipping her brush in the light blue paint. I wasn't interested in getting caught watching, so I pulled back from the edge and went to work. I picked up the scraper and started in the lower right corner, squatting on my heels. As Carol pointed out, the old paint was in good shape, and the need for heavy scraping was minimal. The scraper was one of those long-handled jobs with a reversible scraping blade held down by a wing nut. It was sharp and shore off the occasional flakes and bubbles right at their lines of adhesion. I worked across the bottom and got all the squatting out of the way first. Then I stood and worked all the clapboards waist-high to just overhead. This all took less than half hour. When I rested for a minute, I realized I'd come up without the milk crate. I didn't want to interrupt Carol just yet, so I switched to sanding and retraced my steps. With half a sheet of sandpaper, I was able to do most of it. The sandpaper caught some nicks and splinters and tore in a few spots, but I stretched it to its usable limit and sanded everything but the small area just under the peak of the roof. It was 10:45 when I finished everything I could reach. Then I called to Carol and asked her to throw up the milk crate. I peeked around the corner again and she was 12 feet from the front of the house. "How's it going?" she asked. "Good. I just need something to stand on." "1 second. Carol hooked the handle of the paint can to the ladder rung closest to her waist. She climbed down, stepped off sideways, and walked around to the stoop. She took the remaining things out of the milk crate, turned it over and shook it, then stepped back to gauge a toss. I relocated to the middle of the roof. "Here it comes," Carol said with a grunt as she swung the crate forward and up, releasing it with her arm fully extended. It came straight with less than 3 revolutions. And I caught it awkwardly with both hands. When I looked back down, her arm was still extended. She knew enough about throwing things to have a good follow. "How was that?" "Nice," I agreed. "Now stay right there and spot me in case I fall off this thing." The roof was only slightly slanted towards the gutters, but it was enough to roll a milk crate if you didn't watch your feet. With a quick and sudden roll, you could easily stumble backwards and pitch yourself into the front yard. The 3 surfaces of the roof, falling away to the front, left, and right sides respectively, all met at an awkward apex directly under the main peak of the house. To work any portion of the out-of-reach triangle, the milk crate had to be placed on a slant. I used one hand to scrape while holding the front edge of the roof with the other. I repeated the motion in reverse and had the whole area prepped by 11:30. Carol had nearly finished the side of the house by then, but broke to move the ladder so I could get down to prep. We set 12:30 for a lunch break and resumed working. I put the milk crate on the stable front porch and started on the overhead sections first. The paint by the front doors was in slightly better condition, so the scraping and painting wasn't quite so intense. I was done with the prepping by 12:15 and walked around the side to watch Carol, my wrists and arms unusually tired from the repetitive rubbing and reaching. Carol painted quickly. Her progress up the alley was formidable. She was on the ladder again and working away from top to bottom on the last 5-foot section. She dipped her wide brush no more than just an inch into the paint, and carried no more periwinkle blue to the clapboards than necessary. When the brush came up dripping, she turned the palm of her brush hand upward and drained the excess paint with a deft, angled lowering motion, pulling it up quicker than she lowered it, and losing the excess blue in a thickened stream off the corner of her brush's synthetic hairs. It was pretty to watch and virtually unchanging from dip to dip. She covered 3 or 4 feet of clapboard with each dip and kept the top 2 inches of brush hair completely paint-free. This kind of attention to technique, an $8 paintbrush could last 10 years. Carol dipped the brush about once every 10 or 15 seconds and lowered herself 1 rung on the ladder every 1 or 2 minutes. Never in life had I been motivated to paint the way Carol painted. Usually paid by the hour, I always preferred being slow and good than fast and good. Finishing one job and moving on to the next was always an inconvenience, a disappointing change of temporary habitat and scenery. I stretched the jobs out and moved as little equipment as possible. Moving ladders and setting up staging was the least enjoyable aspect of house painting. The slow application of paint was the relaxing part, the therapeutic part. Being forced to move quickly spoiled the magic. The endless summer afternoons, the hanging out with your equally nonchalant co-workers in the sun, the irresistible tug at certain times in one's life of predictable, even repetitive classic rock radio stations. Carol finished the alley in a flurry of fluid brushstrokes. I laid the ladder on its side against the fence and gathered the loose supplies in the milk crate before she closed the can of paint. Then she used the spigot towards the back to fill a coffee can about an inch or so up with water. She dropped in the brush to keep it wet during our lunch break and put the can and brush together on the front porch in a shaded corner behind the low wall. As long as the oil-based glue doesn't dry on the brush, you don't need thinner. Water storage is entirely acceptable for lunch hours and short breaks, Carol instructed. What's the plan for food? I asked her on the front sidewalk after placing the milk crate just inside the front door of the apartment and locking it up. I don't know, said Carol in a contemplative way, considering a few options in her head. Have you been to Gary's yet? I hadn't heard of it. What's Gary's? It's right behind my office. Come on, I'll show you. I climbed into the front seat of Carol's truck and off we went to Gary.